All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're back again. How we all doing? O'Grady?
Feel like we're making this seems like it's becoming a habit, you know?
Oh yeah, a good habit or bad habit? I guess it's yes to be
It's hard to tell these days.
And you, Lee, how you doing?
Uh, Doing well. Things are going pretty good for me right now, I guess. So, yeah.
Cool. Me, I'm rocking and rolling, feeling good. So this is Ready Set Data. For those of you who are live, thank you very much for joining us. For those of you who are catching up on the YouTubes, thanks for checking in on us every once in a while. We try our best to get it up there as quick as possible. If not, that's my bad.
Anthony's
So-
only job, actually.
That's all he does.
Pretty
That's
much. That and to constantly talk. But I'm good at that. So it may not be valuable, but I'm talking. Yeah, so I'm glad we're here. We got what? So what's the topic today? It is one key mistake when installing SQL Server. So is this a goal? Like we should? This is it's a key mistake. We should definitely do this, or
This is
What do you
the
think?
is this your favorite mistake that you always make? Is this
your
like
favorite mistake?
so that's what my parents used to call me.
Oh,
Why are we quoting? Is that Sarah McLachlan? Is that her song? Please tell me you know what I'm talking about.
you're gonna have to break this down for us, Lee. This is the
You
new
want to
topic
sing
of
it
the
for
stream.
us? Lee's
All
gonna
right,
sing
I gotta
it?
go
We're gonna-
make sure that it's Sarah McLachlan. There's a song that she
You are
sings
recording,
about
right?
somebody
Promise you're
being her
recording.
favorite mistake. Why is this so amusing to you?
Sure you can answer it.
Those of us who've been called that, we think it's kind of funny.
I'm a
It's
middle
Cheryl
child.
Crow.
Birds.
It's
Yeah.
First
Cheryl
time it was-
Crow.
So
Oh,
close.
yeah, that
It's
sounds
fine.
right.
Listen,
Is that the
y'all,
Pictures song?
the Pictures song? What are
Cheryl
you
Crow?
talking about?
Pictures? Kid Rock? Okay, so it's
No.
like 3 seconds in and we're already diverged. How's everybody doing?
No, that's not it at all.
Awesome.
But I do know that song.
Look at this
Yeah, I know.
photograph. No, that's not what they're talking about. Okay.
That's a different
No,
picture.
we're talking about one key mistake that you shouldn't make with SQL Server.
That's what it
that I
was.
see
Should
all the
make-
time.
On a live stream.
Um,
You do see it all the time, don't you?
yeah. So here's the thing. All of us install software. The three of us do. Everybody watching, we all install software, and it's really not a big deal, right? I mean, you click the exe, you you get rid of the stupid Windows prompts that ask you a million times, "Are you sure you really want to do this?" And you're like, "Yes, Windows. I'm really certain by now."
You definitely
Please.
stop for the hours it takes to read all the warnings and the legal disclaimers. We all read those, right?
Yeah, and you know,
Love-
installing software takes a while. Yeah, I was just going to bring up the EULA because we all read the whole thing, right?
I mean, yes.
And
Yeah.
that takes a
do.
while. So, I mean, what do you guys think? Is how does that experience compare to like installing SQL Server? Do you think?
So just
How
like a
is this experience of
basic,
installing?
any installation of software compared to SQL.
Yeah.
I mean, you run the executable and it makes your SQL servers, and then you just click yes on the EULA, and that's all you do, right?
Totally.
No.
Yes. That's,
So the difference. So I do think I do behave differently with certain installers. I know I'm not the best at it. I'm probably worse off the clock than I am on the clock. If I'm installing like a game or just trying to get something done, I am a little click.
yeah.
But I kind of, when it comes to SQL Server, I'm kind of more along the lines of what I assume you're going to suggest with this talk.
Mhm.
And I'm also that way with certain other things. Like I've installed Git like 3 million times the last couple weeks. New people, new installations, new computers, all that stuff.
I thought you meant for yourself.
people
I'm
wanna
like,
do-
are you messing up the installation? Like,
No, so
that
like
makes more
but,
sense.
like with Git and other things, and I hope I'm not sitting fun of this talk. Like there are options when you go through that you may or may not want. And so I always, when I'm talking to new people as they get hired on, like just read this at least once. Like
Yeah.
some of this will matter to you at some point. and sometimes they'll bite you butt right away, and sometimes they'll bite you up later. So I think I'm better about on the clock than we joke, but I know I'm not perfect, especially when I'm in a hurry.
Well,
Yeah.
I hope you're better about installing SQL Server on the clock. Otherwise, I failed. But anyway,
Right.
um, no, yeah, I think, I mean, there is a big difference. First of all, you don't have, when you're installing something like a video editing software, I mean, there's configuration to do, but you do that after. There's post install configuration for SQL Server too, but um, you're not typically when you install video editing software, the decisions you make during installation don't affect the performance. It's what you do after. You have video settings you want to change, screens resolutions, blah blah blah, that sort of thing. But that's all after you've done the install, you run it, the software opens up. Um, it is different for SQL Server because there are more options. I feel like with SQL Server, like you mentioned, Anthony, there's more choices to make to uh, to get it installed versus other software. And I think that's the first thing that makes the mistake so easy to make. The mistake that people make, or a key mistake, is they do what they do with the software at home. They just
I
click
just
next,
click
next,
through
next,
it.
next.
Yeah.
Yeah, you just click through it and you're like, oh, whatever it says is fine. And then you let it do its thing. You come back in a few minutes and boom, you have a SQL server. Well, yes, that's true. You do have a SQL server. Um, However, in somewhere between 6 months and 6 years, somewhere in there, it's not going to keep running very well. And you're going to be asking the people at your company about, well, why is performance bad with the application? Of course, they're going to blame the database because everyone does.
Always the
And
database's fault.
Default, blame,
Yeah.
acceptor.
yeah, I mean, at some point, somebody's going to say, "Oh, well, there's a database back here. What's happening over there?" And someone's going to look at it and they're going to say something like, "I have no idea what's happening," or "I think I kind of know," or there'll be, an experienced DBA who will be like, "Let me take a look at it." And then after the DBA leaves, goes to the bar, gets his beer or her beer to help them relax after what they just saw. They'll come back and say, "Okay, the first thing you did wrong was click next, 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 next when you installed because this thing is totally hosed."
I think I laughed because you made a drinking reference, but I laughed because you said only one.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah,
One bottle
okay.
of whiskey.
Yeah,
Yeah. I do understand what Anthony was saying though about at work I act a lot different when installing software. I actually do read through every single thing and make sure, is this going to affect my work computer? I should be a
What does this
lot better
mean?
about it at home, but I'm also usually not installing anything too advanced on my home computers. Like all my
right.
Visual Studios and all that stuff is off of my home computers now. So yeah, that's all work installed, and we have very specific guidelines that need to go into. I'm sure it's exact same with SQL, yeah. And are we going to go over the some of the standards that are?
We can. The first thing I thought about talking about is just why is the whole next, 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 next thing going to hurt you at SQL Server? And yes, Spirit, that is personal experience, not on the going to the bar, but on the shock of who did this and not, what were they doing when they weren't paying attention to what they should have been paying attention to? No, I mean, that sounds kind of mean, but
They
again, I think
probably
it's,
weren't a DBA.
well, correct. They probably weren't a DBA.
Yeah.
And they're not used to all the options. So they get in there into the user interface. And they're like, I don't really know what most of this means, so I'm just going to accept whatever's in here or that sort of thing. But it's a surefire way to set yourself up for problems, to set your company up for problems. At some point down the road, the application is going to scale, which means the data you're putting in there is going to scale, your database is going to
Mhm.
get bigger. Newsflash, when your database is 6 MB, it's always going to work fine.
Well, yeah. Fresh installs, everything looks great, right?
6 years from now, when
Mhm.
it's 600 gig and you haven't done anything to SQL Server except next on the install, you're going to be calling someone like me.
So
Um,
maybe we shouldn't tell people. This is like job security type stuff.
right. Um, so I mean, it's going to cost you on performance. It's
Mhm.
going to create maintenance headaches down the road because once you discover it, this is kind of a pain in the butt to fix, and a lot of times it's going to require downtime to actually fix some of this stuff. Um,
Yeah, I don't think
so
people realize how expensive maintenance is because, the more maintenance you have, it's part of the formula to determine how many DBAs you end up needing to just to keep things running. And they think, oh, if it's a performance issue, it's if somebody throw an index on there. But there's things to deal with as far as all kinds of different functions in that SQL Server. And if there's more than one, you got to standardize the environment a little bit. So
yeah,
it's actually a lot more work, with programming. Grady probably, maybe he'll agree with me on this. It's always like when you do something poorly, the problem's always in the future. You'll never see it right away.
Oh yeah, I've literally
That's why I
said
call billable
that's
hours
for
spirit
future
guide.
me. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm. That's for future me to deal with.
yeah, it's billable hours, Spirit, to fix all this stuff. And this, so we're kind of talking around a term that the three of us know, uh, and widely known in the IT world as technical debt.
Yes.
Yes.
When you click next on the SQL Server install, you just created a whole ton of technical debt.
A
And
really high interest loan. Because
yeah,
you're only saving yourself probably 15 minutes, unless
Yeah.
you really you're not DBA, you don't know what any of it means. Then yeah, I acknowledge the fact you have some research to do. But
But still, the amount of research and
yeah,
time you should just do it right to
versus
save years.
all the problems in the
yeah,
future.
and you can Google. I mean, you can go out on the internet and search for how to install SQL Server, and you're going to get some good advice. Um, the thing is, how many network administrators who've been asked to install SQL are actually going to do that? Or the new sysadmin who's maybe never done it before, and somebody just gave him the assignment, hey, so and so needs a SQL server. The dev team's waiting on it, so hurry up and get it done. Are they going to go Google or search how to install SQL Server?
Hope
They're gonna
so.
get one up there just as fast as possible, and
Exactly.
It's okay. It's just dev, and then it becomes prod.
yeah, it's just
That
that for
too.
now. Uh,
So so when anyone just like races through the installer for SQL Server and accepts the defaults, we're going to talk about the ugliness that happens from that. Some specific things, and I'm sure other things will come up from you guys and maybe even our audience. The first thing is the core install and all the system and user databases are going to go where? What drive are they going to go to?
on a
You just
default,
click next.
your
Yeah, you just
default
click
drive,
next.
it's D drive, C drive, whatever your default
Yeah,
drive would be. Oh, your
Defaults
yeah,
like
Windows partition into drive.
yeah.
That's
It's just
lovely.
going to go to C. If you don't do anything else, you just build a server. Most
Hmm.
servers just you have a C drive, and unless you know that you're supposed to not put everything on C, SQL Server when you start the installer is going to go, oh, here's a C drive, and that's all I've got. It actually does by default put stuff on C, which kind of sucks.
Yeah,
If you don't know to change that, then everything goes onto the C drive. Well, what else is on the C drive?
Windows or
operating
your
system.
operating system,
Yes.
not
Yeah.
necessarily if you're using Windows Server, but
And what should be happening on a regular basis after the second Tuesday of every month.
Updates.
Something to do with
Patch
burning
Tuesday.
incense. Oh, yeah.
Burning incense. Yes, we should burn incense to scare the ghosts away so that things work at our business.
Ghost of the
Yeah,
machine.
patch.
The
You're gonna
ghost of
patch the
Windows
thing.
95.
Yeah.
And your C drive is probably, maybe 100 gig, and you just use like 20 or 25 of it to install SQL. You're already using 25-ish, maybe more, for the operating system. So guess what? Half your C drive is now gone already, and you haven't even put data into the system.
Yep.
So eventually, with no one's looking or paying attention, this is actually going to tie into that conversation we just had. Some emails maybe are going to start popping up into people's inboxes, and if they choose to ignore those emails, the entire server is going to stop working because the C drive will be full. And when you connect
Right.
to it and look at it, it'll say it has 10 megabytes left.
Yep.
So there's the first problem.
The
With
same goes with if anybody plays games on their computer and uses Steam, it defaults directory to your C drive. Games are huge. Very similar
Yeah.
issue.
Yeah.
Most of us have dedicated drives just for our games, and if you forget to change it, all of a sudden you're like, "What do you mean my C drive's full?" And yeah, so think about that, but on a huge, mega data scale.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
yeah, if you're not paying attention, you don't notice the emails that you're getting from the monitoring software. The first indication that you have that there's a problem is the customer is telling you that their application doesn't work. That's not how you want to find out that you have an outage.
That's too late.
Yeah, that's too late. That's also not how you want to find out that somebody just clicked next on the installer for SQL either. But
Yeah.
so anyway, I mean that's one issue about putting everything on the C drive. The other thing is SQL Server is not like other applications either in terms of its read and write patterns. So it can be, depending on how much traffic you have from your web applications or whatever it is that's pointing to it, you could have, 1,000, 2,000, 20,000 read and write operations per second happening on your SQL Server. Well, we just talked about how the operating system is on the C drive, and if you put everything else on the C drive, I better
That's
hope you
busy.
better hope the C drive is like really snappy.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And then even just IO patterns within SQL Server are not all the same. So there's the garbage can of SQL Server is what, Anthony?
TempDB.
TempDB.
It's like, is this a trick question?
That is not a trick question. This is a softball question, which you knocked out of the park.
Okay.
So, I mean, TempDB is used for sorts. So if you have order bys in your query, that uses TempDB. If you use, obviously, temp tables, that uses
Ah,
disk.
Surprise.
If you use table variables, that will use your disk if it spills over. All kinds of things happen inside TempDB. TempDB is used for CheckDB. So CheckDB, for those of us who don't know, or you who don't know, is a process that SQL Server uses to make sure that your data is what it's supposed to be. That's the
there's no
TLDR on that.
corruption.
That's the
Yeah.
summary. And it's very IO intensive. It reads the entire database. Well, if it's all on the C drive and it's reading the entire database, and your overnight processes are also running while CheckDB is going, and everything is on the C drive, wah, wah.
Mm-hmm. You might get a good
So
couple months out of it. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, this is, everything's going to slow down. It's just not going to work right. So, any other, you guys have any other thoughts on what happens about SQL Server on the C drive before I go on to the next one?
No, I don't think so.
I think that's well defined by now that people understand.
Okay,
Your server will blow up. So okay, we're good.
pretty much.
Yeah.
So on
I'm gonna
older
stop.
versions of SQL Server, when you just accept all the defaults, you end up with a SQL Server default for a setting called max server memory. And that huge default setting is like, I don't know, 3 petabytes. So you're telling SQL Server you can have 3 petabytes of RAM, SQL Server.
So also known as you can have all of it, because
Yes,
yeah,
also known as you can have all the RAM. So talk to me. Why is that a problem?
don't take my RAM as a developer, but we obviously hold that precious to us. But yeah, I mean, if it's using, God, even 80% of the RAM, you're going to be bogging down the rest of the machine, and it's not going to be doing anything anyway. So,
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a
what's
When,
healthy
the
balance what the operating system gets in RAM, what the SQL Server gets in RAM. And if either one of those stepping on those toes, you got
yeah?
things flipping back and forth, right? SQL Server is supposed to be
yeah.
keeping your data in RAM, keep things hot. Um, for performance, right? RAM, even though drives are faster now, RAM is faster.
Yep.
And if it's constantly giving it up because of pressure, um,
Yeah.
had an
Yep.
inappropriate joke there for a second. If it's given up for because of the pressure, then bad things will end up happening and vice versa.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is there a reason that you know of that they decided to make it just open RAM intensive, or that 5 petabytes or whatever it was? Is that they chose that to be their default? Or that you can
I
think of
don't,
even? Yeah.
yeah, I don't know why they did it. Later, I think it was 2017 installer, you actually get a max server memory recommendation in the installer to specifically keep you from making this mistake.
Okay.
Um,
I'm sure enough
but
people
no, I
made
don't
that
know.
mistake with it being the default that they're like, let's change the defaults a little bit. Yeah.
So that's kind of the meta story behind all of these. And I wasn't sure if we're gonna get to it later or not, but since you brought it up, like I'm a big fan of reasonable defaults,
Hmm.
and for reasons which I'm not aware of, I don't know why. SQL Server doesn't have reasonable defaults most of the time, or at least historically it hasn't. Like if
Yeah.
you do next, you're gonna have a bad day, and that surprises me.
It
Agreed. Yeah.
surprises us in the SQL Server community too. Yeah, I mean there was a lot of pushback about that. Like we should be able to give us guidance or
Mm-hmm.
guidelines or something.
Or just
But
a
on the
reasonable starting point, right? Like
Yeah.
what gives you doesn't need to be pro level, just like what's okay for 80%.
yeah, well, let me give you well at least one story about why Microsoft might have been hesitant. So here's the theory I have on defaults.
Ooh, conspiracy
Um,
bacon smells good.
so have either one of you heard
Never
about
have I ever.
the guidance from Microsoft that that your page life expectancy shouldn't exceed 300 seconds? And if you haven't, that's okay.
Yeah, no.
Okay. So if you did an internet search on page life expectancy 300 seconds, you'll get all kinds of information, obviously because it's the internet, but you'll have people telling you that 300 seconds is the thing to do. You'll have people telling you that's dumb and here's why. Um, and even now, many years after Microsoft put that into print, DBAs and people who are responsible for SQL Server are trying to kill the myth that your page life expectancy should be at least 300 seconds. because that guideline came many years ago when servers were much smaller. So there was a lot less data, a lot less RAM. 300 seconds now is not a lot of time. I mean, that's 5 minutes.
Yeah.
If you have a database that's 3 terabytes, I hope that your page life expectancy is more than 5 minutes. Otherwise, your
A lot of
disks
work.
Oh,
and the
so
CPU are going to hate you
Yeah.
because there's constant I/O, constant data churn, and your queries are not going to run very well.
So I guess I didn't understand the original question. So are you saying the device used to be keep your page load expectancy down low, like 5 minutes or less?
No, so I'm saying that you brought up
Keep
the
it at
whole
least
issue
five
of
minutes.
defaults. Yes, it should be at least
Yeah.
5 minutes. That was
Oh, we just
something that
okay. Okay.
Microsoft published as a default, as a we need to give people some guideline.
Okay.
They
Yeah,
want
no,
to
I understand.
know,
Okay, okay.
and we're still trying to kill that.
Yeah, that's okay. But that makes more sense to me. I was for a
Yeah.
second I thought you were saying they used to say keep it low, and I'm like,
No,
no, it being high means
no,
that like
sorry.
everything's in RAM. No, that's fine. No, I got on the wrong lane there.
That's a good question. Um, so I think that might be sometimes why Microsoft is so slow to offer defaults
Yeah.
or guidelines, because then they tend to become permanent. And
Yeah.
as we know, nothing is permanent. I'm sure both of you in your respective fields as data engineer and software engineer probably know the question coming and have already thought of 10 things in your field that used to be true but aren't now.
Yeah.
So I think
Many
that's part of it.
languages in my field that used to be the go-to language to write in are just dead. It's like, okay.
Right.
Ever
Exactly.
Some have
changing.
taken
So
over, like JavaScript
Mhm.
used to be just a thing to make a little bit of an animation. I learned ActionScript 2 and 3 very fluently for a number of years in my career, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. And does it? It's okay if neither one of you know what that is. But I did a lot of coding in ActionScript. No, that's how
No.
you made games in Flash.
Oh,
okay.
I never got into game
And
development, surprisingly.
Flash is gone. Flash is
It
Yeah.
is dead. Yep.
Yeah, it's not even life support anymore for a couple of years of life support. So yeah,
Yeah.
things definitely do come and go. Things
Mhm.
change.
Yeah.
I've heard of Silverlight. Yeah, for sure.
So
Cold
yeah, you get
Fusion, you know.
yeah. Oh man. Even I, as a person who's not a programmer, I know about that from the job that we all shared. So
Yeah. When you
um,
don't have an IDE and you have to just change the source code.
That's called JavaScript. Oh, is it?
good.
Oh, sorry.
Oh.
I was offended 90% of the internet. I am so sorry.
Great. So yeah, I mean, next through the SQL Server installer, you get a horrible default of we're going to let SQL Server have all the RAM, and there are mechanisms. What happened to
My
you, O'Grady?
I touched my water and it turned my light off.
Cool trick.
There you go.
Maybe it was me. I just turned your light back on.
What the hell was that about?
I don't know. It was
I mean,
weird.
it's a touch touch sensing light. So like if you touch something, and I'm wondering if it like got grounded or something, and I touched something else because
That's
it's like
interesting.
behind
That's
my
weird.
monitor, so I didn't touch it. Whatever.
But so there are mechanisms, beyond just the things we've already described. There are mechanisms within the Windows operating system and SQL Server where they essentially do this tug of war over memory. Um, and so that can also happen too, and you end up with SQL Server is paging work out to disk, and it'll write a warning in the error log that hopefully someone's looking at. That will say, "Hey, I'm paging work out to disk. You should probably look at that. That means there's a problem." So that's something else that can happen. And there are, if you look up Jonathan Cahias resource, I think it's resource monitor or a memory manager or something. There's queries where you can actually return data that shows you that back and forth tug of war happening on a system. So anyway,
But only if it's misconfigured, right? I mean, if you configure it right, you give to Caesar what is Caesar's, and there's no battle.
true.
Yeah.
That's not always a set it and forget it though, but doing that at least eliminates the issue of the horrible default. Now, in newer versions of the installer, and I think it was in 2017, you actually get a prompt from SQL Server installer. Hey, we think you should use this much RAM. We should give this much RAM to SQL Server, and that will protect the OS. But yes, you can go in and configure Mac server memory. Somebody you both know has a blog about how to do that. Oh wait, that's me. And that you could use DBA tools, PowerShell to do that. So there are ways to fix it after the fact. And once you fix it, in air quotes, you should still monitor from time to time and look at like available megabytes on the system and check periodically, because your system is never for SQL Server set it and forget it, because your data isn't that way. I mean, your data changes over time. The way you're reporting and querying the data changes. So you have to check up on stuff like that. But yeah, so there's that. Then on older versions of SQL Server, if you just click next, 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 you end up with one tempdb file. So here's why that matters. Well, two reasons it matters. It matters because from earlier, we talked about how it ends up on the C drive, and that we talked about how that sucks. The other reason it sucks is if you have a multi-core system, which if you're running an enterprise SQL Server at work, you do.
Hopefully.
Yeah, hopefully. Then, let's say I'm just going to make up a number. You have 32 cores.
Okay.
Well, each of those cores has a threads that it uses to do work. With tempdb. And if it only has one tempdb file, then it only has one file to work with to make all of those tempdb objects that you need to run those queries. So if you have a lot of tempdb queries or queries using tempdb, a lot of sorts, order by, and even if you don't specifically put sorts, sometimes the way you're asking for a query or asking for information in the tables involved, SQL Server has to sort things in order to get you the data you asked for anyway.
Is that
That
where
goes
the like a string comparator type data would go in as well? Like, does it
stream
hold a
competitor.
string comparator? So, like, if you're
Oh,
doing string comparison, would that also
yeah,
be where that would be kind of cached, or how is that?
that's very possible. It could
Yeah,
use.
you're probably saying that because that's usually what ends up causing something to bleed over.
Yeah, I've
Overflow.
seen
Yeah.
that
Yeah,
cause issues in RAM type leaks
But
and
go
stuff
on,
like
Lee.
that.
it can. Yeah. So certain types of operations within SQL Server, when it goes to logically do what you're asking it to do, it needs to build a hash table, for example,
Mm-hmm.
and that's tempdb, and so, but yeah, there are lots of things that end up in tempdb, and if you only give it essentially one place, and you've got 32 cores trying to do work, and it's got one place to do the work, it's kind of like rush hour in St. Louis. You know what I'm saying? um,
Avoid it at all costs.
avoid it.
I
Yeah.
understand.
Um, and you'll get nasty contention, and your queries will be slow because it's trying to create and destroy objects in tempdb, and it doesn't have enough threads to be able to do that as quickly as it needs to. So again, it's going to be slow.
Mhm.
Customers may be complaining, your boss might be complaining, um, and standing behind you going, please tell me what's wrong. Why doesn't it work? This might be why. Now, in newer installers of SQL Server, again, it detects how many cores you have, and it gives you I almost hate to say this, the current, what's known as best practice, which is up to 8 cores. 8 cores as a maximum. So if you have 32 cores on your system, SQL Server will probably suggest to you 8 TIPDB files. Now, the reason I'm dancing around this is because of the whole defaults thing, because that's not a hard and fast rule that you should make 8 just because you have 32 cores. But SQL Server
Mileage may vary.
Mileage may vary. You should definitely have more than 1, probably more than 2. Just depends on how busy your system is. But SQL Server will say, hey, we're going to create 8 files for you. And you get to size them. You can choose sizing. Oh, that's something I didn't even put in here. File sizes. I'll shelve that for a second while I make myself a note. Because there are defaults in there for file sizes. Anyway.
There's tiny microscopic. Anyway.
Yeah. The file sizes defaults aren't the best, but they're better than
sounds better than the RAM defaults. So
yes, they are.
If they're usable.
For sure. So yeah, TempDB was not going to be configured correctly if, especially in an older version, you just click next, and you think you're done. Let's see. Questions, comments, concerns?
Usually. No, I think that's I'd like to hear some of these defaults that are set properly. I want to know what Microsoft or what SQL in general has done
what works
properly.
out of the box.
Yeah, like what do they do that we don't have to worry about while installing? I know I'm talking like a developer, and that's because
yeah,
right.
Yeah, so what did the developers do to make it easier for the end user to be usable?
So one thing I can think of.
Great interview question, because I would be stumped.
So one thing that happens, this is actually the counterpoint to the last point I was going to say. So we'll skip to the last point, and I'll answer it in a positive way, and then I'll tell you what I've seen people do. SQL Server, by default, when you go through the user interface, you get to a place in the UI where it asks you, what components do you want to install? SQL Server has the engine. You have integration services, you have reporting services, which is now technically, and for a while now, been a separate install. But there are things like data quality services. There's like a bajillion options in there. So they don't pick all the stuff for you. Like I think it's the database engine might be the only thing that's selected by default. And then you have to decide if you want the other stuff. So from the perspective of the question you asked, I feel like that's a good thing that they do. They protect you from over installing. Now, on the flip side, let's talk about the system administrator, network admin, or even junior DBA who gets to that screen and they're not an experienced SQL Server installer. What are they going to do?
I might want this. I think I want this.
Depends.
I see it.
Yeah.
So
I want to hear what Anthony has to say.
Oh yeah, I'm about to point this back at you, O'Grady. I don't know in your current employer if you help other people get the Visual Studio set up, but I've had that opportunity a lot, and I do see like this urge when you install Visual Studio, you're like, oh yeah, I want that, I want that. Like we don't do C++ development on this team. I'll click that, game dev,
Man, I
don't you
feel
dare click
called
that.
out.
Yeah. Like I might want to play with the
Yeah.
F sharp. I wanted to learn that click, and then you just bring everything in. So, do you
Feel
see that?
really
You
called out. Because I have things that I put on my Visual Studio that I'm like, I want to play with this.
That's great.
I'm never gonna touch it, and I know I won't. But when it's
F sharp thing
there
is
and
me.
it's an
I did it.
option, it's like,
Yeah.
what was the one like? One was specified for mobile development. One was specified for like
Yeah.
game development. I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna get both of those.
Yeah.
Why? I
Yeah.
get done with work, and then any development project is not on a computer. It's like on my 3D printers and stuff. So I'm never
Right.
gonna touch it.
Yep.
In other words, we're saying we're guilty.
Oh,
I mean, I'm not saying we
100%.
do have SQL Server, but like the urge is there.
Yeah, it's there. And if you're in a rush, like I talked about, and your boss comes to you and is like, the devs are waiting and they, can you get this done by lunch? And you look at the clock and you're like, well, maybe because it's 11 o'clock.
Yeah.
You're not going to Google how to install, and you're not going to stop at that screen to try to figure out. You're just going to give everybody everything because you're
You don't
trying
know
to,
what's needed. Yeah.
you don't know what's
Oh, yeah.
needed. You don't want to be peppered with questions when you ask a question, and you're hungry.
You don't want to do this again because you already wasted half a day.
Yeah.
And then you kind of said something that I want to respond to. You said
Sure.
they want this server up by lunchtime, right? Because they want to work on it. The same people who say you should sit down and design systems and think about it and really ideate how to get things done are the same people who say, how long will this take? Like 2 hours, right? Like this will be done by lunch every time.
Well,
love
where is it in your backlog? Like.
Yeah.
No.
Is it in progress yet? No? Why not?
Because I was busy working.
Yeah. I know you have 6 things in your work in progress and your limit is 2, but you need to add this as your 7th thing because I need it. Yeah.
Yeah, that happens. Should not happen.
Yeah, so there's that.
It should not be normal, everyone.
Right.
But it kind of is a lot of times. I think we're working towards non-normalizing that. Because we feel that a lot as the development side as well. Like, hey, we need this done by lunch. I'm like, you're telling me about it. It's 10. What do you mean? Like it takes me an hour to get this deployed out, like, and QA'd and all that. Like, yeah.
I'm already
Luckily, I
fighting
don't
that battle so
deal
much.
with that much anymore. But
5 people, and I'm like, limit is 3 things in queue, and like things pop up, and it's like, well, I gotta be that guy, and then like say no. Well, then we gotta take something out of the queue, right?
Yep. And so
explaining that it's a pop push. Like, no, you want something in, something has to come out. Like, there's no.
Yeah, and that's what your project manager or Scrum Masters are hopefully helping you with and protecting you from, ideally. And the reason this is bad is that everything you install on a SQL server, all those components, they take up space for a service that it might be no one in the company is even going to use. B, they use resources. They use RAM to run. And again, if you're not going to use it, we already talked about how RAM is a crucial resource. I'll circle back to that really quickly and say, when you set max server memory, we're going to talk about max stop in a minute. That's why I said that. When you set max server memory, I'll let you in on a little secret. That's not all the memory SQL Server uses. That's the memory that's used by the database engine. So, and that's not even entirely technically true. You get a little more than your max server memory. So if you install integration services and your company doesn't need it or use it ever, it's going to use RAM to run. Just the service. If you install reporting services, it's going to use RAM.
And if that sounds counterintuitive, you really need to sit back and think. It's a program. I mean, they call it an operating system on its own. SQL Server
Mhm.
OS. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a program, so it's got to use memory to do its job. So
Yeah, exactly.
So I wanted to bring up too, because we're discussing, if I'm installing Visual Studio for people, or how we would do it, and clicking through is obviously bad no matter what. But for us, if we do a basic click through and we select everything, it's pretty easy to pull it back out afterwards. We can say, oh well, let's
Mhm.
slim the system back down. We're using too much RAM. We're you don't need this. Let's pull that out. What's the what's the process in SQL if you install it incorrectly and then you want to go back and say, okay, well, I have time now. Let me go fix all my settings. Is that an option or have you already screwed yourself?
It depends on what it is that you want to tweak or change. So let's say you installed integration services and you realize, oh, I don't need that.
Mm-hmm.
You can uninstall individual components like integration services, reporting services. That can be uninstalled. In the case of reporting service, well, even for SSIS, there is now, since I think it's SQL Server 2012, which is out of support, by the way. Um, there's a new SSIS-DB
Didn't we have
database.
a whole show about that?
yeah,
Yeah.
Refer
Um,
back to that show if you don't know what we're talking about.
so
Nice plug.
SSRS is a little bit more complex because it leaves databases behind. So you would want to drop those databases after, well, see, as a DBA in me, he will not, you guys won't be surprised. Please make sure you have backups that you have tested and know you can restore, and then you can drop the database and get
yeah,
rid of it.
Fair. It's a little better
Um,
advice than just drop it.
yeah. Um, so, yes, if you wanted to go back and you wanted to move your user databases because you realize everything shouldn't be on the C drive,
Mhm.
that's downtime.
Yeah. Well, I guess,
You're
yeah, that's also something. Like for us, uninstalling whatever we do, I can reinstall Visual Studios probably by the time that it would take me to uninstall things that I did improperly. But
right.
there's no downtime for us. I mean, there's development
Yeah.
downtime, but when I'm not developing, I'm still doing 100 other things. Whereas I feel like a lot of your side, without your tables and SQL stuff, like that's kind of like your big part of your job. A lot of
Yeah, for
downtime,
sure.
and the rest of the company has downtime without those tables.
yeah.
Yeah.
Database is down. Nothing's working.
Yeah, mine might affect me for an hour. Yours would affect the whole company for an hour.
Oh yeah,
Or
yeah. Visual
yeah,
Studio on your machine broke. There would not be a giant,
mm,
quote unquote, come to Jesus moment where everyone freaks out.
yeah.
All will get together and have a war room to figure out what's going on. You'd be like, "Oh, Grady, come on, get your together.
Oh, and it
Let
happens
us know
all the
when you're back
time.
online."
Anybody
Yeah,
who's anybody that uses
especially
Visual
installing
Studio,
game tools.
probably.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so the other thing too is, we talked about how everything works initially when you do the install because, you have a 6 MB database. Um, when you create a database, you get, at a minimum, you get two files. You get an MDF and an LDF file. And 6 years from now, when that 6 MB database is 600 gig, and now you decide you want to move it, it's even more painful because it's so large. Now it takes time to transfer those files to whatever new drive you've attached or created for the server. Um, if you have a database that has multiple files, then it's not harder, but it's a little more work because you have multiple files you have to move, and you have to make sure you're moving the right files for the correct database. You can't just move. I mean, I suppose you could. You have to be careful, is what I'm saying. And so that factors into it as well. So some things are easy to fix, Some things are harder if you want to go back and try to fix a next installation. So yeah,
But
the
either way,
last
it
thing
sounds
on
like it's more downtime than just doing it properly the first time.
Yeah.
for sure, for
Yeah.
sure. Takes a little pre-planning, but if you do it enough and you build yourself an installation guide, which I have and it's available, uh, then it's kind of becomes second nature to build it right from the start, and then you don't have to fix it later. The last thing that's on here that I want to talk about is why next and your done approach is not great. Is older versions of SQL and the installer will leave you with a max stop setting that's inappropriate. So max stop is max degree of parallelism, and I think you two certainly will understand the concept of doing something in parallel.
Hmm?
Well, SQL Server
Sounds like a great idea, usually, right?
Synchronous,
yeah,
asynchronous.
and parallelism isn't bad within SQL Server, except when it's not managed. And the max out setting you get, again, this is another one that's not great, but in later versions, you do get an option where it suggests a max stop for you, I think. Yeah, I think it does. Because it reads the number of cores that you have, if I remember correctly. But you get a setting of 0, which tells SQL Server use all the CPU when this queries go parallel. Which sounds great because you're thinking, well, doesn't mean using all the CPUs means it goes faster? Maybe.
Well, something gets to go faster.
And what's
One
that?
of the best. I'll say, well, a query. I'll say, one of the most important things SQL Server does is concurrency, right? Like, you want thousands of people to be using at the same time, and if a query that may be important is hogging all the different threads of the CPU, and everyone else is waiting in line, that one query is going faster, and everyone else feels like they're in the DMV.
Bingo. That's the problem with not managing this. That's it exactly. There's a companion setting called cost threshold for parallelism that essentially determines how expensive a query has to be before SQL Server would decide that it goes parallel.
Yeah.
So a person that Anthony and I are familiar with, named Kendra Little, coined this term called query bucks. So when SQL Server,
I use it all the time.
When SQL Server, when your application submits a query, SQL Server looks at it and does a whole bunch of things. Part of what it does is it estimates how expensive is this query that O'Grady's application just gave to me. And I will say, because it's O'Grady's application, it's not going to be very expensive because he knows what he's doing. But not every SQL server is as fortunate to have O'Grady as the software engineer.
Just one
and
right
so you
now.
get some you get some super expensive queries. But to Anthony's point, the query might be 6 query bucks. That doesn't sound like much, and it's probably not. But that's the point, is you end up with all these small queries that don't cost a lot going parallel and monopolizing the CPU on your SQL server. And then when somebody not named O'Grady, who's built a super massive ugly query that wants 500 million rows because there's no where clause and they want all the columns, and by the way, they have functions in their where clause so no indexes can be used, SQL Server is going to be looking around for some CPU, and it won't get any because the tiny queries are all using the CPU. So you should change max stop. You should change cost threshold for parallelism. I picked 6 on purpose for cost, and Anthony probably knows why. But cost threshold should be conservatively at least 25 or 30. And typically I see people setting it at 50 at a minimum.
I was wondering why I had 50 in my head. So yeah.
And there's guidance on max stop. I'm not going to go into that because that's not the point of what we're talking about. If you Google max stop best practice, you'll get what you should. There's a KB article from Microsoft that explains it. So
Yeah, the point here is you can't just accept the defaults when it comes to installing it. It's just too many. All of it's important. You don't need to like do a thesis on every single item, but you should know roughly what they mean, what they're for, and not just click next.
yeah. So that's what I have for tonight, guys. In terms of one key factor that's going to make your SQL Server performance worse than it should be is this whole next.
Mm-hmm.
We've talked about why next causes the problems that we're warning people about. Questions, comments, concerns? Well, O'Grady, I think maybe finding someone for us to raid.
I am. Yeah, no, I think that's it's valuable information. Again, not even just in SQL, but in any applications you're looking at. Just getting better at looking at what you're installing. We've all seen applications that have the built-in secondary installers where you download something, you're installing it, and in the first question, it's like, would you like to also install these things that are unrelated and probably a toolbar and whatever else? I think stuff like that was what started having me look closer at what I was installing because I'm like, well, now I have a bunch of crap on my computer that where the hell did this come from?
Tisk.
Oh yeah, it's or you go to to be stereotypical, your parents' house, and you look at their internet and they have 14 bars going down the top of their screen.
Yeah.
Which nowadays, I guess with people on Twitch, it's probably your grandparents' house. Sorry. But yeah, my grandparents didn't know what internet was, so. But yeah, so we're gonna raid the Average Guy TV. I think we've raided them before, and they just started their show, and they're just going over home gadget things and their typical channel. So we can
awesome.
Let me get that going. If you guys want to do outros, I can get the raid going.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us, everybody. I'm Anthony, the engineer.
And I am Lee Markham, the database administrator of the group.
I am O'Grady, software engineer. And we are going to see you guys next week. Same time, same bat phone, same bat channel. Same bat time, same bat channel. That's what it is.
Yeah. Sounds right.
Keep an eye on our Twitter. There is also a new Twitter that was just birthed called something. I just shared it, so it's on my Twitter, on my current status. But it's I think it's RSDTTV.
Yeah,
that's it. We'll start updating stuff there, so you don't have to follow multiple places. But still appreciate if you do. Keep an eye out. We'll let you know if anything changes as far as times. But yeah, I think we're good for now. We'll see you all next week.
Yep. See you next week. Bye.
Bye, everybody.